Mike Cottrell, Stephanie Hill, and David McCarthy.
All right. Welcome to the Rentals Imperative. We've gathered a group of panelists to glean upon their industry knowledge for this particular session. But we are going to dig in and explore how rentals could be or will be part of the MLS marketplace. So I've got three panelists here. Mike Cottrell, CEO of Greater Tulsa Association of Realtors. I've got Stephanie Hill, VP of Las Vegas Realtors for the last 16 years, and prior to that was 20 years as a broker. And last but not least, we have David McCarthy, operating partner of 3 Keller Williams offices in Greater Boston with 400 agents. So let's kick things off. What would be the business case for brokers adopting and using rentals in the MLS?
Well, I guess I will jump in. We've had a mandatory submission for rentals for as long as I can remember here in Las Vegas. Different scenarios for why it's important. It gathers information for comparables. If you have an investor client coming in, they want to know what areas, looking at homes, what's the median rent price here in this area. We've got a very, very strong rental property type that takes in all kinds of deposits, terms of rentals. We don't take short-term like, Airbnb types. They have to be 30 days plus, but there's such things as executive rentals for people coming into town needing something 3 to 6 months short-term. So it really, I was just looking at our numbers. The rentals incorporate 13% of our database of active listings at this point, and I think we've had 15,000 plus that were leased out just in 2020 alone, that data in there. So, it helps our agents, it helps our property managers, which by the way have to be special permitted here in the state of Nevada to actually do their jobs better. And that's basically kind of in a nutshell what we do.
I'll tag on to what Stephanie said. In a market that we're in, like much of the country with severe inventory shortages, I think it's becoming increasingly popular for agents to try and assist those clients that are moving into areas to find a place to live because there has not been historically one dominant source. We're about 10 years into having rental properties. They account for about 5% of our listings right now. Much smaller market than Las Vegas, but we definitely have activity in there, and we do see properties leasing and co-broking between brokers in the MLS.
I'll jump in then. So my first argument in favor of them certainly would be for the comparables. I mean, there's no question that is information that would be helpful to the consumer, both the potential landlord and an investor coming in. The other piece that I would say that I think would be important and something that so in my market, it's not required to use it. So you use it if you choose to use it. There's other sources or other ways that we put information. I would like there to be that one legal source, and I don't mean legal in the literal sense, but that good source of data. And I would further just say that the idea of cooperation and fair housing issues are better under the umbrella of an MLS, I believe. And again, not everyone uses MLS in my market, so that's why I said the fair housing piece.
Good point.
What do the economics look like for rentals in an MLS?
In which way do you ask that?
Both just on how agents make money, it's typically not always a commission outside of the MLS. How are agents?
Well, certainly the reason why, so again, in my market, which is different than Steph's market, where she says it's required, ours is not required. So agents play that, for lack of a better term, game. Can I rent it before I have to co-broke it? Can I rent it directly? And depending upon the market or the economy we're in is what the fee is to the landlord. But typically the fee is something in the range of a month's rent.
Okay.
So if you're an agent, and in my market, we have rents that vary from, in the downtown Boston market, can be a low of $2,500. That's a little vague, but can be as high as $25,000. It can be higher, but we see $15,000 a month rents, fairly regularly.
And we are a required entry into the MLS, much like Las Vegas, and offered a couple different options for brokers because it is in the MLS. They do have to offer compensation. So a lot of times it is a flat fee. They've done equal to a deposit, equal to a 1 month's rent. There's several different options that we have for them to select. But since it is required, of course, it is a required field to have compensation.
This is all really great. You mentioned that you're seeing price reductions. I think that's just a really good segue into where any of this data is actually being stored. Historical rent rates, and just making sure that rental prices and rates are fair. Does your local MLS store all of that? If not, where should we be going to get this information to learn more about rentals and help pricing?
Well, Chelsea, in our market, as I said, it's always been mandatory submission. So we keep historical data for a total of 10 years. So when something is at lease category and then goes into history, a lot of times property managers take, a multi-year lease agreement with their owners, so they can, if one moves out, then they don't have to go get another agreement for the next to move in. So I would say in our market, we probably have the best data for comparables in the rental spectrum. And we do have a good relationship with the Nevada Association of Apartments, which kind of, we try to pull in some of their numbers when we're talking about rental units. Right now I wanted to touch on, because of COVID, it's been a directive from our governor that right now there's still a moratorium where there's some people that have not paid rent since April, and they can't be evicted because of that. So that has been extended to, I believe, October now. And in the same breath, you cannot show tenant occupied properties, whether it be for lease or for sale, because of the pandemic. So we've got some kind of crazy stuff going on here to where, the investors have kind of slowed down in the market because of that fact until it all gets sorted out.
So in Tulsa, we do not delete data. We are, we've kept data since we're about 10 years old now with our rental property type. So that way appraisers, brokers, agents that are members can, value investment properties, working with investors or banks, whoever they may be working with, in order to be the source in our market for those rental rates and property information.
So because I'm not with MLS, I don't know how long the history is. I know I could run a report and get detail going back a number of years, 5 or 7 years, I think is the history trend that I can see on deals. But I'm not sure in the Boston metropolitan area that MLS would be the source for that, because the percentage of people that use it is slimmer. Interestingly, as I said earlier, because of COVID, listings in the downtown Boston market and in Boston itself for rentals has picked up because agents are now having to find tenants, and cooperating through MLS is the best way for them to be doing that, where it wasn't before. If you went out to the suburbs, you'd find that most agents use MLS and there's not another database. We have a couple of other databases that are used in the city, and sadly, some people still use Craigslist. So it's a very unfortunate situation there. But I don't know if there's any great source. Frankly, as most recently as last week, I was reading an article in one of our trade journals for business professionals in Massachusetts. They were quoting somebody saying that rents were climbing, and we were all sitting in the office going, what are they talking about? Because we're not seeing that even close to that.
You bring up Craigslist, and fraud is really big in my market in Seattle. It does pose the question of, bringing in rentals into an MLS would theoretically reduce that. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? And are you seeing the same amount of fraud with essentially fake rentals and the scams that are associated with it?
We are definitely here in Vegas. We've heard, some really sad cases of people finding something on Craigslist, meeting somebody in front of a property, giving them money, and, they clearly have no ownership interest to be doing that. I think a thing that's important that we make it mandatory in the MLS, residential rental, condominium rentals, whatever, actually are real estate transactions. So if you're a participant in our MLS, our law state you have to have a lease agreement. So there's contracts that are involved. So it was easy for us to say it's mandatory to put these in. You're selling a piece of land, a high rise, whatever it is, that is part of your real estate. I mean, there's agents that have longtime home buyers that they years ago found a rental for, and now they're clients for life. So I think if you really think about the big picture, rentals fall into real estate and real estate transaction. So, in my case, that's why we feel they should be in the MLS, besides the comparable and all the other great issues.
I would agree, Stephen. I'll say that Oklahoma does not have a property management license type. So that is in the works right now, but any agent or broker can manage property. So now you have to have a license in order to manage property, but any agent or broker can do it right now without having that additional license or certification, which I believe is what they're technically calling it today, as a certification. But I agree with you. If you're a participant, that is a real estate transaction, licensable activity.
Right, and Vegas, in Nevada, it's called a property management permit. But if I'm an agent that works with investors and they say, Stephanie, can you put it in the MLS so we can get a tenant? I'm going to manage it. I can do that without having the permit. But when it comes to actually collecting rents, doing all of those functions, you have to have that permit. And I think we have probably close to 2,000, if not more, that hold that permit here in Las Vegas.
We are certainly not that regulated when it comes to property managers, not even close. And we certainly have seen every Craigslist fraud behavior, whether it be long, traditional one-year leases. And I love your angle on that stuff as to why it should be in, because it's a real estate transaction. I love that. I'm going to be banking that for my conversations with people at a later date. And certainly, I mean, God, you could just go on any town that's a tourist town and find everybody complaining every weekend about somebody showed up at their front door for the weekend short-term rental that wasn't done through one of the sources that we know of, like Airbnb or VRBO, that somebody just showed up at their door. So the fraud on Craigslist is just remarkable. It's horrible, frankly. Sad.
The other thing that I think of when I hear all of this is that most of the real estate agents at some point in time start the relationship with their customers and their clients at the very beginning. Most Americans are finding themselves renting an apartment to build credit, to buy a home. and get a mortgage. But they don't just happen at the beginning of, a home ownership cycle. They happen whenever someone needs to move, or find a new job, or relocate, or retire, or downsize. And what happens is, in these markets where, the MLS or the real estate agent isn't able to service that rental, you kind of lose an opportunity to see that customer throughout the entire home buying journey, or their real estate life cycle. And so I think that something to hit on is that you're able to continue that relationship no matter at what point in time in their life cycle they are.
Good point.
At some point in time, you realize that real estate agents are being trained to not help their customer through every aspect of that, if they're not able to do it within the MLS. Something that I've wondered is, for those of you who have rentals and have, agents that are advertising and inputting rentals into the MLS, how do you make sure that the most eyeballs are on those rentals that are available?
Are you meaning the public eyeballs on those?
Yep. Like, as far as advertising and syndication goes.
Signals on our public home search site, just like, several years ago when every MLS should have a public website and portal and that kind of thing came out, we put our rental properties on those sites. We also syndicate those. So we do send those rental property listings that are in the MLS. And they get syndicated out onto IDX sites if a broker wants that property type. Some don't, because they don't deal with that, but we certainly have some that do. Larger property management companies and those in the data feed, so they'll have those available for their website.
Same here. Syndication, IDX feeds. We have people that advertise, we'll help you find a rental. Give us a call. Their websites are mostly dedicated, just like everybody has a niche, whether it be high rise or land.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, ours are, well, I shouldn't say obviously, because it's the broker's choice, but ours are syndicated out to third-party aggregators in my brokerage. So we see a variety of way the consumer is getting to us on them. But something you mentioned earlier is the whole kind of sort of life cycle of the client and the life cycle of the agent in that relationship. I remember, I've been in the business long enough, for 20 years, but I remember 20 years ago, the typical agent saying, I will not deal with a rental. Get them out of my face. I don't want to deal with them. And I think it's in part because the rents have gone up. They're so significant today, and you can make money doing it. But I also think that ultimately the agent that realized early on that by taking a client in that life cycle of you're a renter to a homeowner to hopefully maybe even an investor at a later date, or just a future sale, and depending on where you are, I mean, we do have the people who rent, buy, and sell in our market because they've gone to college or they've got their first job and now they're getting married or meeting someone and they're going out to the suburbs. So we've had that life cycle, and I think people realize now it is beneficial to keep that client versus pass them to that what I would refer to as just saying the rental agent that does nothing but rentals. So we definitely see that piece. And frankly, I think most agents that do a really great rental business are doing it through a variety of sources of repeat clients. I think those that do it really well and have a great reputation of having great landlords, because that's a part of the equation we all know, is how good is the landlord, that they are actually been in a long-term relationship. And on a business level with their landlords. And it's a much better relationship for the consumer, in my mind. Hope that helps.
All very, very insightful. How does the clear cooperation policy play into rentals?
Oh,
Well, here in Las Vegas, we had a little bit of confusion early on when we adopted clear cooperation. Since, as I mentioned a couple of times, it is mandatory submission here. So it is governed by the clear cooperation policy mandated by NAR. So early on, we did take it to educate people. We had a couple that, didn't know the policy, didn't know, thought, I saw a piece in NAR that said rentals and commercial, are not mandatory for clear cooperation. But in talks with both NAR and legal, if it's a mandatory submission into your MLS, then it is governed by clear cooperation. So they have to put it in unless they have an office exclusive, just like any other property type.
exactly the same thing here in Tulsa. So
All right. Well, think we are at time. Correct me if I'm wrong. This was just a really great conversation, and hopefully we can break out and talk about how this, actually gets put into play in other markets where they may or may not have rentals.